Catherine, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Catherine Calloway at Kirksey. I'm in Houston, and we have offices in Dallas and Austin. And I'm our Director of Sustainability and Building Performance.
Awesome. Natalie?
Hi, everyone. I'm Natalie Terrell, National Director of Sustainability at the Beck Group. We have 7 offices across the southeastern United States. I'm currently in Dallas. That's where we're headquartered. And I'm really excited to talk about materials and how we implement them.
Awesome. And my name is Allison Wilson. I am an architect and a sustainability director at Air St. Gross. I am physically located in Austin, Texas, and our firm is headquartered in Baltimore, Maryland. And we're really excited to be here. So the first part of this is how we're going to spend our time. Full disclosure, we probably have more content than we have time, so we're going to just keep going through it. We're going to do a little bit of introduction about what the Materials Pledge is and sort of some level setting based on the initial data set that most recently got published by AIA in November. And then we'll run through case studies that each of us will deliver about how this is going in our firms, and then open up the floor for Q&A. You all are muted, but also feel free to drop questions in the chat. And, to the extent that we're able, we can try and tailor our remarks as we go along. So first things first, we're gonna do one of these fun things. So if you're on your laptop or you have your phone handy, we want to just try to get a sense of who's in the room for a hot second. So if you go to www.venti.com and you enter the code, or if you've got your phone handy, you can scan the QR code that's on screen right now. And it should, oh, I'm watching people show up. That's awesome. And then that code is 14732456. Um, that information will stay on the next slide at the top up here. And so the question that we have is then, like, where are you at? Trying to understand, are you pledge curious? Is that where your firm is at? Have you not signed on to the pledge, but you're trying to figure out what this means in the context of our industry? Have you signed the pledge as an organization but never reported? Have you signed, reported, and now you're trying to figure out what's next? Or have you signed the pledge, reported, and your organization's next steps? And you might just be curious to see what else is out there. Quickly going to do this myself too. Okay.
Also, while you're at it, make sure you see the chat, and Becky filled in there's a link to report this for your CEU credit.
Okay, so it seems like we have the most pledge curious cohort. That's exciting. Hopefully this helps to demystify a little bit of where we're at. Thank you for that. So sort of the level setting, right? What is the Materials Pledge? What is this all about? The Materials Pledge has been around for a long time, but the reporting for it is relatively recent. There was a year of beta reporting for reporting year 2023, and then reporting year 2024 was the first sort of formal reporting. And that reporting information was due for submission in May of 2025. The pledge itself addresses 5 categories of sort of influence within the material landscape: human health, social health and equity, ecosystem health, climate health, and circular economy. And there's sort of all sorts of commensurate questions and considerations that go with those 5 topic areas. So for the annual reporting right now, the only portion of that that is required is the firm scale reporting. There's some of that that's sort of the fairly basic demographic information about your organization. What's your name? How big are you? Have you signed on to other things? Sort of the very high level pieces of it. And then the other 2 chunks of the reporting are optional, both at a project scale and at a product scale. The project scale reporting, if you happen to be familiar with AIA 2030, is a little bit different within the Materials Pledge than it is inside of 2030. If you've done 2030 reporting before, you may be familiar that that reporting is for those projects every single year that they are in a design phase. With the materials pledge reporting, the intent is that design firms submit those projects at the end of CDs. So in whatever year that project finished and published its CDs, that would be the year that you would report it into the materials pledge. When we look at that first year of industry scale data, there are 121 firms that reported information, and that includes 419 projects. Again, the projects are optional, but that is still a reasonably big data set, covering 3.5 million square feet across our portfolios. What's interesting as well when you look at that data is that within those 5 impact categories, the level of understanding is distributed. Unsurprisingly, the 2 where understanding is greatest are human health and climate health. That makes sense because that's where we have the greatest density of material transparency information, whether that's in health product declarations and material ingredient inventories and things like that, that really are well aligned with human health questions. Or with other environmental product declarations and similar that are really aligned with those climate health objectives of the pledge. Also, unsurprisingly, the social health and equity is where sort of collectively we have the weakest collective understanding about that. And I think that's in large part because the metrics and the tools and the frameworks for how we define and clarify and talk about those subjects are still evolving and still sort of getting uptake into the market. When we look at materials library practices, all of these chunks in red with that red ring around them indicate that firms are identifying sustainability criteria for inclusion in their libraries to one extent or another. What varies is the level of enforcement that goes with that. And then you can see sort of the minority portion of respondents are either not vetting sustainability related data as they're developing material libraries, or they simply just don't have a materials library. By project type, when we look at that scale of the reporting, the vast majority are sitting on this half of the donut, office, higher ed, healthcare, and K through 12. That's where the majority of the reporting are. There are lots of other project types that are in the data set, but definitely fewer by count and by percentage. Then I think it's interesting too to look at the design strategies at an industry scale. Again, this is looking at all 100 some odd firms, 120 some odd firms that reported in. The 2 most common things that our organizations are doing to reduce material usage are sort of the first obvious one, right? Reductions in program to reduce total area. That has obvious economic benefits that goes with it as well. That has obvious energy components that go with it and just sort of general efficiency measures that go with it. So, being tolerant of less waste makes a lot of sense for all of these things that we're talking about across reporting platforms. And then the second most common thing that the industry is doing is designing to product modules for kind of common dimensions and minimizing offcuts and waste in that material way. And then you can sort of see down on the line. The other piece of this that's interesting is that 48% of the firms that responded say that they are driving these material usage strategies largely in response to their firm's own internal goals. That's by comparison to the 33% on these green chunks, which are either because a certification was being pursued, which is typically going to be client driven, or that the client had some other kind of specific request related to materials. So that sort of makes this donut more in like a 33% it's being driven by clients in one way or another, 48% it's being driven by the design industry first. And then you can see there's sort of other components in the response pool as well. When we look at the data as well, not all product types have the same amount of information available. Some of them have way more than others. Most commonly, carpeting, acoustic ceiling tiles, and resilient flooring. Lots of our organizations are reporting on those things. The information about those is readily available. It's pretty easy to make a good choice or a better choice in those arenas because the information is transparent and available. You can see the sort of next grouping of things down here. including paints and coatings, countertops, insulation, et cetera, down on the line. And you can start to see then how it starts to sort of taper off, and it starts to be, less visible, how much of that data is around. And so I think the question then really becomes like, do we double down on some of the places where this information is most available? Do we continue to push our efforts there? Or do we sort of work down the chart and try and push manufacturers and across the built environment to sort of have the level of data that's available in these three product categories across a broader cross section down the rest of the chart? I don't have an answer to that, but I think that's sort of one of the questions that's in tension through the reporting to date. So with that, that's sort of the super high level of the reporting. And Catherine, I will turn it over to you.
Great, thanks. So I'll talk about our journey through reporting the Materials Pledge and what we're learning through that process. So here's the timeline overall of how the Materials Pledge evolved, and our own involvement there. We signed this initial letter among other architects asking manufacturers, hey, the HPD is this health product declaration is a thing now. This living future, there's things happening. Please report, please let us know what's in your products. And we want to know. And so that evolved over time. And then the pledge became official later in 2019. And throughout that, Kirksey, we've tried various things in our library and improving our specs and things like that. But when the Mindful Materials forums popped up, we joined that as a way to get further involved. And then we've reported the past 2 reporting years. So the Mindful Materials Forum, I wanted to mention that and make sure y'all are aware of the efforts there to create a common materials framework. This is hand in hand with, you can see the 5 icons there with what the Materials Pledge is about and the impacts that our materials have. But this is an effort to bring together not just architects, but everyone involved in the material lifespan, from the manufacturing to the owners, and data groups, to make sure we're all talking about the same thing, and we are trying to do the same thing. Let's streamline that process. So in the next slide, one of our gatherings, I guess they pulled this quote, something I said of like, at Kirksey, we've cared deeply about our impact, but have had, multiple attempts and inconsistent action. And so that's why we're here to help improve on how we're working. So in comes the materials action plan that's required for reporting, and that's part of our overall sustainability action plan. But developing this and outlining our goals and near-term actions for each of those 5 buckets has been really helpful to help us move forward. And so this is a snapshot of our reporting. In 2023, it was a very short time frame, and we just reported at the firm level, answering questions about how we address materials overall. It took 2 of us, just a couple of meetings and answering the questions. Maybe it was 3 hours of effort. And then last year, we reported on the 2024 data. So we selected 7 of our projects, and had 7 people. And you can see our process there. We each took a project and we evaluated a couple of the online tools that are available to help us assemble that data and find the EPDs or the VOC documentation and different documents, and allowed us to kind of aggregate that data in the spreadsheet overall. Some feedback that these online tools are really helpful in some ways, but sometimes are missing information. And so we're still kind of figuring that out at the same time that those tools are improving. And so we're really glad to see that process. So overall, for the 7 projects we looked at, a variety of scale and project types, several of them were pursuing LEED or another certification, so that helped with already having some of the documents pulled together. And then the next slide, just some of the general project questions of what are some of the goals of the project? Are you using salvaged materials? Do you have any goals for waste management, and things like that? And so these are the results in this fun like Tetris matrix that we assembled. And so what this looks at is the 13 different materials that we studied. So each project just picked 2 or 3 or 5 materials to study, and then we aggregated them all together. And the darker colors indicate this product had some great data, or the lighter colors, there was like maybe one of the products did, or there's not much data available. And so the white gaps really show us where there's opportunities or where there's missing information and opportunities to work with those manufacturers, and ask them questions about their process here. And so these are some of the lessons that we extracted from that. Some of the products with the best data, very similar to the chart that Ali was showing from the national report, that we want to establish our GWP targets. We talk about embodied carbon all the time, but let's focus on some of the key impact materials and drive towards that. Specifying FSC wood, biogenic materials, resource reuse, and source salvaged are definitely good things to do. And also, like Ali mentioned, the social health and equity data is very limited. So let's keep asking about it and advocate for it. And then also equipping our architects and designers with what questions do we want them to ask reps when they come in the office or are talking to them. So some of the things we put in place, we have our goals from the materials action plan. We've got a committee working towards those. And we've got resources on our intranet. We have internal classes we call CurcU, that we've been giving to help educate our designers about this process. Next slide. Oh, and then the screening tools. So I mentioned several of these tools. I highly recommend looking at all of them and see what works for you. And it's really about putting the information where people are already working, interrupting the workflow. And so this is whether it's one of those online tools or we have a OneNote template that all the projects use, and putting the sustainability information there of things we want them to look for on products. And then the next slide also about how we put together our basis of design master schedule, and creating a tool there for part of that feeds it both into the specifications and into a sheet on the construction drawings, where the contractor will see it and it will be part of the conversation throughout construction, that we are looking for this material. And so all of that is wrapped up in it's described in a case study on the Common Materials Framework website. So I wanted to make sure that you all are aware of that website, not just for our case study, but there's a lot of great tools. The AACO toolkit is a really helpful way to do exactly what we're talking about today and figure out how to implement this in your own firm.
Awesome. So talking a little bit about what this looks like in our firm over at Air St. Gross. We similarly did the firm level reporting both as part of the beta and in the 2024 reporting year. For the first year, for the beta, we did one project and one product, mostly in like what are the questions, like how do we get familiar about what we're even being asked to provide. And then in the 2024 reporting year, we were able to do 100% of the eligible projects in our portfolio at the project scale. And then full disclosure, we skipped products absolutely entirely. We just did not cross that bridge. But it is kind of exciting for us, like when we look at, as our firm, at that overall reporting data in the 400 some odd projects, like 6% of the projects that are in that project scale data set are ours. And so we're pretty proud of that, just that like we're representative in that data set. When we look at the firm-wide pieces, our sustainability action plan includes materials similar to what Catherine was saying. Ours is nowhere near as articulate with like stuff on all 5 topics. It's embedded inside our interiors piece, and it's really focused on our basis of design specifications, the sort of knowledge base we need to build inside our firm, and kind of the closing the loop on the circular economy pieces through our specifications and sort of advocacy with clients. When we think about our firm knowledge, there are, we have an Air St. Gross University where people are doing their continuing ed and all that kind of piece. We had sort of been opportunistic about having those focused on materials. With the advent of the materials pledge reporting and knowing we were going to be asked about that, we were a little bit more intentional about getting that content into the curriculum of those sessions and like looking out for it. Um, and in general, I would say our reported data aligns with what's happening at an industry scale. We're not like super outlying in one way or another. But what was interesting in the project scale questions for us in 2024 is that we crowdsourced that data, right? Like Catherine was saying, they had like one person per project. We kind of did the same thing. We took the survey questions and made it a form, like a Microsoft survey form, and they, people responded to that survey, and then we tabulated the data and did the data transfer up into the upload platform. But what's interesting about that though was cleaning up the data in the interim between that process and realizing that questions like, do any required building codes, policies, or client standards for the project include sustainable building materials criteria for the project, means something very different to me and to my team that are specialists in sustainability in addition to being architects than it does broadly to the project managers and the PICs that were responding to that question. And so there was sort of a back and forth scrub of that data to clean it up and kind of make our own logic a little bit more self-consistent for why we were choosing some of the responses we were. And that's true in our waste diversion piece as well. And I'll talk more about that in a second. We also learned through some of those questions how episodic it is for who is choosing the materials. In some projects that's the project manager, and in some cases it's the project architects. Like it depends on who you talk to, right, as to sort of where the line for accountability is and who is making those choices. We work primarily for colleges and universities all over the country, and I think that's also a little bit of a special nuance where most colleges and universities have a basis of design standard for like, they're not going to stock every ceiling tile as attic stock across their campus. They're going to say you will use this manufacturer because they have a durable relationship with that manufacturer across campus. So I think that also changes our relationship to materials a little bit as specifiers. And so that sort of, identified as a question in our work. We also similarly, Catherine was talking about tools. We had the same conversation about tools. I would also say, like, that market is so crowded and it changes so fast. Not only because the products themselves are improving, but who are the keepers of that data is rapidly evolving. I'll put this document in the chat in a second when we get to the Q&A. But there, as part of that CMF materials toolkit that Catherine was talking about, somewhere up there is this document that basically goes through, probably 40 or some odd of the tools that are out there. And it'll at least give you sort of what is it best for? What is it probably not going to solve for you? What are some helpful tips? Where can you learn more about it? And our organization has had a lot of value from this, where like we sat down with this with a cross section of people for like an hour and a half. And like, instead of now our team going to look at 40 tools, we picked 4, we did a deeper dive on 4, we finalized 1, and like we can move forward instead of sort of the amount of effort it takes to sort of at each individual firm to do this research. In my opinion, this kind of a resource lets everybody jump to like the second or the third question without everybody having to do this research themselves. And then our reporting would also suggest that the third-party certifications incentivize that materials research and work. And sort of, we've got questions about how do we kind of push that along in some of our projects that may or may not be seeking third-party certification. So looking at our data a little bit as well, this first one is that kind of codes and questions piece. Generally speaking, I scrubbed a lot of our data to say no. We do have some clients, like I said, that their design guidelines have some specific things related to sustainability criteria and materials. So we identified those. We also identified LEED. But again, you can see, for us, more than half were no. There isn't something specific that we could point to. We also had some good questions about waste diversion come up. At this point for the projects we were reporting, we didn't have it as a stock practice to have a construction and waste diversion goal for all projects, whether they were going for third-party certification or not. It's bananas that I just said that. But here we are. So, but like this data is a highlight for that of like, oh yeah, that's a really low hanging fruit for us to be able to change and have a huge environmental impact. And Natalie can say as well, like when she gets there, of like, if we don't specify it as designers, it's not going to get built that way. It's not going to get practiced that way. So the worst that can happen is we put it in writing and they say, hey, we can't do this because it's going to cost money and we have to take it out. But if we're not asking for it in the first place, like that's on us. And so that's sort of the mindset we are now coming to that question with. On this piece of it, this was another one of like, ooh, this has a whole vocabulary to it about wet applied products and VOCs that apparently not everybody in our organization understands. Even meeting this low emitting materials credit for paints and coatings and adhesives and sealants and things, hitting that credit doesn't mean that all of your products have to do that. Like the threshold for those credits aren't all the thresholds for those are most or like 90%, right? So a lot of sort of tweaking in our data set related to that. On the same time, there were also some improvements where some people said just flat out no, but again, kind of just being aware in the marketplace that like there are low emitting materials kind of everywhere. Like it's hard not to find low emitting versions of things. And they generally, in our experience, haven't come with cost premiums. So we're seeing this happen for all of the reasons anyway, that it's healthier for the people who are building these structures and everything else. So again, this was another one of those questions where we had to post-process some of our crowdsourced data, but it gives us an opportunity to sort of focus our education moving forward. Similarly, about whole building carbon reduction targets, like we do that modeling in-house when our projects call for it. Great, that's happening. There was a follow-up question about which scopes are included. That was a Wild West set of responses to crowdsource, and again, highlights someplace that in our organization, I know we need to do some more education of just sort of what are the scopes of whole building LCA and what is included typically or not, as the case may be. And then I thought this was interesting as well, that like many of our projects have improvements materially, but more than 2/3 of that is like not intentional. It's not like we were trying to do some of that in a large case, but they're in many cases happening anyway. As Catherine was mentioning, similarly, we've done a number of internet resources. I will quote Ellen Mitchell to say that, right, we're probably most of us aware that institutional memory is quite short, probably 90 days or less. So anything we can post about, share about, communicate in whatever platforms are available to us in our organization, but with some amount of frequency, probably helps us to get our messages across and sort of taken up by the audiences who are regularly in decision-making positions to do something with that information. So that's been our experience so far. Natalie?
Great, thanks. So I'm going to pivot a little bit, in that Beck is an integrated design build firm. So everything that Catherine and Allie just said, I'm going to say yes and to. Sustainability really is embedded into our core values. And unlike a lot of companies, we actually really pay attention to our core values, right? Like I would hope every Beck employee can tell you what our 4 core values are, but focusing on caring and approaching everything we do with safety first mindset is very important to us, because as integrated design build, yes, we have the architectural side where we're looking at materials and material transparency, but we're also trying to make sure that it's okay and better for the people in the field, right? So it's a little bit of a different perspective. And our goals and our sustainability journey really started in 2007 when it was formalized. It started before that, but that's when it was really formalized. And you can see, similar to what TxA and other firms have done, like we signed the pledges, we were part of these early initiatives for materials, and we have embedded it into our process the whole time. The only difference is we did not actually sign the materials pledge until this year. So while we had it embedded, while we've been tracking it internally, we've never formally submitted it to the AIA. When I talk about this and we talk about material transparency, I always like to give a little bit of a background. Just like if you haven't been involved in this and you're thinking about like old school LEED projects, it was like, oh, recycled content and, low emitting adhesive sealants, paints, coatings, that sort of thing. LEED V4, along with the industry, really was transformative in talking about material transparency. And a lot of times people are like, well, I don't, what is material transparency? I don't really get it. And I love this analogy of the Twinkies, right? The very first ingredient you see is this like enriched bleached wheat flour. And we all think we know what flour is, but then there's like these parentheses with like, like what is there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 other ingredients in flour. And that's what we're trying to accomplish with material transparency, because there are so many chemicals out there that are going into our building materials that we have no idea what they are or how they function, how they impact the environment, or how they impact people. And so that's the importance of this, right? Along with that, we often see all these different rating systems. We work on projects that are LEED, Green Globe, Living Building Challenge, you name it, local jurisdictions like the City of Dallas or Austin have. And the language is going to be similar, but they're going to reference different standards sometimes, or different versions of the standards. And then embedded in those different standards, you're going to see a whole slew of other reference standards, right? So you're going into a rating system and they're talking about green buildings, and they've got their credit language or their criteria, and embedded in that is all these other options. And so that's really the strength of mindful materials and the common material framework, is taking all of that and breaking it into these 5 buckets that we can start to talk about in layman terms in a common sense approach. So that's really the strength and beauty of it that helps streamline and simplify information for us. So what that means, and this is where I'm going to double down and give you a look at what it means for a construction firm once it's written into the specs. So Ali mentioned, one of our earlier discussions, if it's not in the specs, it's not getting built that way. So historically, when we're looking at specifications, right, we're looking at performance, durability, and availability and cost of these products. But with this framework comes all these other things: the health implications, the environmental implications, and resource efficiency. And then just like, how do we write this into specifications to further improve industry practices? And that's where we do all of our research, right? So both Catherine and Ali have touched on this, but what it means is, as designers up front, we have to vet our materials, and we have to make sure that what we're putting in the specifications can be understood and clearly followed and implemented. So this is just one quick example of what we do at Beck. We've been using the Sustainable Minds transparency catalog to select all of our products. And then, well, this is one of the resources we use. We use a lot of them. And then in their transparency catalog, what we can do is we can start to find and vet materials based on all of their criteria. So environmental product declarations and material ingredients, where is it on the carbon scale? What certifications does it have? Where is it on low emitting materials? So we're balancing both of that. And we're creating specifications based on that. So what you're seeing here on the left-hand side is an appendix that goes in our Division 1 specs for sustainable design requirements, where we basically create a cheat sheet or a field guide for our construction and trade folks to know exactly what we're asking for in the spec in just like a quick little page turn. So when they're doing submittals and they're trying to move fast and furious, they have this like cheat sheet and guide. And then we have a very robust sustainable materials form for that reporting. And then what I'm going to show you next is how we actually started tracking this and how we deal with submittals, because it is very hard to talk to tradespeople and say, like, we're rejecting your submittal because you didn't provide an environmental product declaration. And they have no idea what we're talking about, right? So to avoid this like hair pulling frustration, we have started training our tradespeople. And because we're integrated design build, we can work very closely with construction team and construction administration and start to make sense of it. So our forms, these are just like a quick look at what we do for our contractor orientation sessions. But we basically go through every single category on this sustainable material form and what we are expecting to see and examples of what that documentation is. And it's confusing because sometimes one document can fulfill multiple categories or criteria. Sometimes they can give us everything the manufacturer has and none of it's what we need. And this is just that information overload that we're starting to talk about. But what we're trying to do is train people to give them the comfort and familiarity to understand this. And recycled content by far is the easiest one. Like, this one is widely understood, right? But this is like the old school. But what I try to teach people is recycled content is circular economy, right? Like, we're changing it and we're going deeper, but it is, we're still talking about it in the same vein as what they're familiar with. Environmental product declarations, again, like people get really confused about this and about low carbon materials. And so we're just really trying to teach people like what does an environmental product declaration look like? And it's not just enough to say yes or no, it doesn't have it, or to just leave it blank and say NA, like it's not applicable, right? We get that a lot. So we're really teaching people like they don't have to understand everything in the environmental product declaration, but we at least want them to know it's going to say environmental product declaration at the top of it, right? And from there, my team will take it, we'll review it, and we'll know if we've got the criteria we want. But much like what Catherine was explaining with their, their goal and their framework, we do have an entire sustainable materials guideline that is bridging our specifications and our submittal process and our material procurement. And so we go into really deep detail in some of these other supplemental guides and internet resources and in-house training about what embodied carbon is and what that life cycle assessment is. And getting back to this nutrition label, what does an EPD look at? What does embodied carbon look at? And we've created this framework where we're really focusing on concrete, rebar, insulation, glazing, and finished materials, which is what you're seeing at the bottom. And that is because it's applicable to all of our market sectors. Every region we work in, every project we work on has these elements, right? Major manufacturers have information on this. It's widely available. And they can give you significant emissions reductions at no to low cost. So, that's really why we're able to embed this stuff into our specifications, whether or not the clients are asking for it. What we do to verify it, so we use one-click LCA. There's other tools out there that provides the life cycle assessment so that once we've got an idea of what we're specifying, we can start to go in and revise the criteria and find out if we actually have a building that's low carbon and low emissions. The other part of this is the material ingredients report. So these are really looking at the human health component. And again, we're showing them on the form exactly what we're looking for. It's not yes or no and nothing else. It's not applicable, right? We need yes or no. And then if it's yes, like provide the backup documentation. And then we teach them like what we're looking for. So in-house with our designers and our interior designers, we're teaching them about the thresholds, whether it's self-prepared, third-party verified, and when they expire or when these various reports expire, which is another huge part of this, right? So not only is the industry changing fast and there's a lot of frameworks, but there's certification cycles of these materials. And some manufacturers, like it's overwhelming, I'm sure, for manufacturers to keep track of this. So we're also teaching people how to find out if they're expired or not. Low emitting interior applied products. So Ali was talking about this and the complication of it. So this category has been expanded to adhesives and sealants, paints and coatings, walls, flooring, ceilings, insulation, and composite wood. That was expanded in LEED before. And we do reference LEED a lot in our internal objectives for our material health and in the common material framework in our materials pledge, just because it sort of streamlines the industry and gives us, real tangible guidance to fall back on when we're looking at these things. So again, you're going to see multiple types of communication here. I would say the most difficult one you're going to see is probably the composite wood. And again, when we look at adhesives and sealants or paints and coatings, it's twofold, right? It's no longer just the VOCs, but it's also the emissions testing over a longer period of time. And that's because there are off-gas curves, right? There's bell curves on these things. So you'll see here, like, this is an example where there's a lot of information that we're asking for like one product, right? So we're asking for material ingredients and human health components. We're asking for VOC components and emissions components. And there can be other things that go along with that. So, these LEED submittals have gotten very long and very complicated, or even for your own materials pledge. In the tracking, I'm sure when you're looking at Catherine's graph, you're like, oh my gosh, this is like so much information, and it really is. I mentioned composite wood is one of the harder ones, and that really is because there's recycled content in it. There's health product declarations, environmental product declarations, and emissions criteria, right? So these are all just examples of how one product can fulfill multiple criteria. And so when you're vetting these, what Beck did was we came up with our own point and scoring system for if they have environmental product declarations, what percentage of carbon reduction do they have? What kind of human health criteria do they have? Are they contributing to recycled content? Are they easily recyclable? Like what does all of this look like? It's not enough to just check the boxes necessarily, because in our basis of design products and in our finish schedules, where we want to get to is like sort of a good, better, best criteria, to where everything in there is going to contribute to multiple categories. And we know we've vetted these for as much criteria as we possibly can. What you're not seeing, and is kind of a throwback to the beginning of the presentation, was the social equity impact portion of it. That's really difficult, right? Because we don't, it's a newer category. We aren't familiar with it, or aren't as familiar with it. And the way we've tackled that personally, which I did not include in here, is about FSC wood, but also legally sourced. And then really an education campaign to our people to help them understand what social equity and that community health looks like. And it really boils down. We used the Grace Farms Design for Freedom toolkit, and what it really boils down to are what materials are coming from what parts of the world that have unfair labor practices, right? Human trafficking, child labor, and forced labor. So right now, where we are in that particular journey, which is harder, is just an education component about always sourcing legal wood and avoiding certain types of materials from certain countries. And we have an entire guide, what that is, what the issue is, and getting into why we should care about that. But I did not include that in the presentation because we're not currently tracking that category. When we're gathering documentation, again, we've all talked about it. The old school way was that you went to the manufacturer's website. That gets really hard when we're talking about an entire project. You can look and look and look and look, and you can come across broken links or outdated information and everything else. Some of these other resources that we've listed, by no means is this the full list. There's almost 5,000 different types of resources, I think, out there. But we use Ecomedes, we use Mindful Materials, we use the Transparency Catalog, and then we use Spot UL. A lot of great resources. What it allows you to do is just kind of one-stop shop depending on what category of information you're looking at. So you're not going all over to these different manufacturers' websites.
But that's a lot of information dropped on y'all very quickly. But hopefully it helps to sort of highlight that there are a lot of different entry points for this. It can be as sort of, high level, firm wide, low hanging fruit piece as you could want it to be. It can also become a lot more, and sort of where you choose to be on that journey is likely to evolve with time. I don't think any of what we're presenting today is like where we started. We all have sort of timelines of what it has looked like to adopt different pieces of this, and what it has looked like to implement it across our firms. But we're super happy to take questions. And I think y'all will get the opportunity to sort of be unmuted or pop those into the chat as well. And we're super grateful that y'all are here. So we had some questions too. I know it takes a hot minute to think of things, but we had also sort of thought about a couple of things that we know have come up across our organizations that have manifested differently. And all three of us have talked about the various catalogs, tools, and things that are out there. How all have you seen those get implemented across your firms, or does it matter how big the catalog of materials you can find in any one place is? What have you found to be most useful in getting people to adopt any of those search tools?
I'll jump in there. Yeah, like you mentioned, there's some great tools that like one, for example, that people already use is Material Bank. So a lot of our interior designers, especially, are going to Material Bank to order their samples or connect and re do some research. And so we've been training them, and Material Bank has trained them as well. We've had discussions about there's scroll down here, look at this part of the website so that they can also see the materials pledge and environmental impact data that is already loaded up on there. Um, as far as our physical libraries, we still have physical libraries and people find that valuable, but it has gotten smaller over the years, where we continue to vet materials or people just order them at their and have them at their desk and then talk to the manufacturer, the reps directly. And so it's more about curating what's in our physical library on a continual basis, and honing in on that there.
Yeah, I'll add to that. So we do what we call vendor breakfasts once a month, where sales reps will come in with their products, and we've created criteria for them to follow based on the material pledge or based on energy efficiency or water conservation, depending on who the rep is. And it's really good to be able to do that just because it means that when we are getting updates to our physical material library, where we're trying to get is that we don't have anything in there that is not meeting the criteria, that's not scoring, a certain set number of points on our own matrix. It just sort of takes the guesswork out of it. So no matter how crazy behind the scenes this information is for us to understand all of these different labels and rating systems and requirements, we're always trying to make it be very, very easy for the teams. And if you can make it easy for the teams and you can recommend just a handful of resources that fulfill multiple requirements or multiple documentation needs, you're going to have better luck getting it implemented because they're not searching all over for things.
That's so true, Natalie. We found that one as well, where like as we were looking through that list, and I apologize, it looks like I can't like drag and drop a file into the chat for this, but we could send it out after. But we have found that like there's a handful of tools that like we want to be pushing, all 200 of us. So like, hey, if you're trying to research stuff, go here, right? And then there's a smaller set of tools beyond that that are useful to like my team and like a more of a QA QC capacity or during CA to be able to like back check on different things, or that's been super useful as we're like trying to build out or refresh the catalog of materials that are like our base spec, that kind of thing. And then there's sort of like the stuff that, just is inefficient for us to go ask people to go use. But I'm sure still happens. And like Catherine, you were saying, like some people just, still will like get the individual rep or whatever that relationship is to get a product.
I just dropped a link to that PDF in the chat.
Oh, thank
Um,
you.
oh, hey, Jim. Got a question about utilizing AI. Yes. I think all the tools are using AI now. And as far as material of information availability getting better with AI, definitely that is the trajectory. And that's also what the common materials framework groups are doing. Like we've all showed, like Natalie showed the spreadsheet that they use, and what they ask contractors. We have a cover sheet like that with submittals too. And so the goal is across the industry, is to have that common ask, or even a common site tool where like you're looking for this product, here you go, click, there it is. And we all provide this, and the manufacturers have an easier way to provide that data directly to all the people asking for it. Um, because because we're all asking for the same thing.
I would say for ours too right now, like thinking through the AI is like the things that gives me the greatest anxiety are like the phantom information that you can still find in bunches of them. And so like I think where our line of inquiry in that space is like, yeah, the AI can be so powerful to like digest just massive volumes of information that is time prohibitive to get through. And I still need the teams that I am working with every day to have the sophistication to know when they're getting a nonsense answer, or to know when like what they're getting is, some too good to be true piece. And that I think changes what we're asking people to know and be expert in, but it still requires a level of expertise to be able to do that, I think. Kate, you're asking about librarians. Do any of you, we don't have one. Do you all have the materials librarian or somebody who manages that? Oh, Natalie, okay.
Yeah, I would love to jump in on this one. So our it varies by office, but our senior interior designers kind of help keep the material library cleaned up, and they're very well aware of what our material pledge goals are. I would say the fun thing about this is seeing all the new materials and talking to the reps and seeing how they're forward thinking in sustainability and their sustainability approach. Like once you start asking for it, the people we're getting in are very excited to share it. But on a technical level, it really requires the language to be included in the specifications. So if you're familiar with working on a LEED job or City of Dallas Green or Austin Green Energy or whatever it is, you've probably had a Division 1 section for sustainable design requirements. And we've created one for just the materials pledge and our own best practices in construction and architecture, right? That details what this criteria is. And, if we're doing our job right, all of our basis of design products are already meeting this criteria. So it's kind of like the easy button, right? A lot of work for my team and department, but easy for everyone else. And then the other part of that is we have embedded this into our workflow. So it's on our Beck portal if you're starting a job, what you do at each phase, all the way from like project pursuit through closeout, what you have to do for our materials goals are there. And then we've embedded the criteria into our finish schedule. So we literally have check boxes in our finish schedule. And we have an Excel version of that where if they're just vetting materials, they can kind of, reference it back. And we have it all clearly written out for them to reference. From the interior side, on a firm-wide basis, they have monthly meetings. Someone from my team usually attends quarterly and talks about sustainability in the materials pledge, and we hear from them and collaborate that way as well. We started with materials in the finish schedules because it was the easiest place to start, to be completely honest. Projects that have very limited finish schedules, like core and shell projects, are a little harder. That's why we had to, develop the Division 1 spec, because we were hearing like, well, this is a core and shell project. It has like 2 finishes and bathrooms. Like, we're not going to worry about it. And we realize that's a huge missed opportunity when there's so many other building materials that are important and provide this information. So I would say, start somewhere. Like, you don't just all of a sudden have to have a material librarian that's doing this. Like, the frameworks we've provided and talked about our firm, like they're, all 3 of these firms, like we have pretty robust programs, but that's certainly not where we started.
Yeah, similar here. And great question, Kate, because we do have a materials librarian, and like your question mentions, like they can manage the lunch and learns and kind of things that are formally coming into the office. But I have no idea what people are ordering from their desk or talking to reps about. And so just like Natalie mentioned, that kind of quarterly check-in with the interiors group, it's when targeting interiors, but all of our market sectors is critical to continue that engagement and education. And so in a similar way, we started with kind of the end of the project with what's in our specs, and but our early SD phase material selections are not usually looking at what's in the spec, in the master spec. They're looking at other options. So that is something in one of our goals coming up of how we can better inform and educate and be part of the earlier conversations.
Any other questions? I've got one more that we had hidden for ourselves, but anyway, anybody else from? So I think the other one that we had and that, we thought was probably worth mentioning, all of us have sustainability specific staff in one way or another, which is in its own right a privilege. Not all organizations have that. And there's a distribution of labor in that, right? Of like some people are specialists in our firms who, could tell you every label. That's probably the three of us. Every label, what those labels mean, why they have them, why they don't have them, how often they, all of that stuff, right? And then there's also the distribution of that labor across teams as well for like what we empower our teams to own, whether we're ever involved or not. And clearly there's some variation in that too for just like what people are most interested in learning about and adding to their own professional expertise. But I'm curious for either of you to add as well, like how are you seeing this split up, or like what do you pass along to the teams and expect them to be responsible for, and what are the kinds of questions that you expect to live in your deeper sustainability experts?
Yeah, so as far as working towards our materials pledge goals, most of the work has been done. Most of the kind of background research and creating the educational pieces has been done by me and someone else from our sustainability team and our lead spec writer, people who are deep in the information already. But at the same time, half of the involvement has also been a handful of people across the firm, an architect or a young designer, um, who has a specific interest or a specific project pursuing something. And so that's been really fantastic to engage people across different market sectors and different experience levels based on, like you mentioned, like their own personal interest and desires. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say very similarly. So we do have a sustainability department at BAC, which again I acknowledge, as Allison was saying, is a privilege. Um, we work very closely with interior designers. I mentioned that we've developed the Division 1 specification language that was vetted with our principals, and then we make sure through a whole framework about all of our internal objectives for energy, water, and materials, that the project manager is aware of it, and that as specs are being written, we can start to vet the information and make recommendations. So it's really a lot of it falls on my team. So my team has 46 hours through the duration of every project to implement our internal objective projects, and well, internal objectives on our projects and this criteria. So we do a lot of the heavy lifting as far as understanding like the technical rigor in writing the Division 1 spec and all of that. But then I would say it is shared responsibility with the designers, the project managers, the interior designers, and we also have a sustainability champion network that's about 30 people across the firm. Anybody can be part of that. And as Catherine was saying, we do get a lot of fresh new talent that seems to be a lot more technically rigorous in this and really interested in driving it and wanting to know more about it. So I think that's great. I think as that continues, it's really giving us a lot of momentum as an industry.
Well, I am genuinely shocked and impressed with ourselves that we got through an absolute mountain of content. I know we went really, really fast, and thank you all so much for being here. I'm sure all three of us would be happy to, follow up with anybody who has any additional questions. But thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed. We hope we get your feedback, and yeah, all the best, and have an excellent end of year.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye,
Thanks,
all.
everybody.